We exist in a fractal, accelerated reality where the raw display of sensitivity is aggressively mistaken for an absolute virtue, and the reflexive, defensive act of taking offense has been subtly codified as a moral imperative, a proof of character. But we must apply the psychological loop inward, turning the lens onto the source of this reaction. What, precisely, is the geometric reality inside the mind of the easily and frequently offended? Modern analytical psychology, when aligned with ancient philosophical wisdom, points to a structural failure, a deep psychic compromise. Being perpetually offended is not a sign of moral strength or high principles. It is the clearest, most tragic expression of a fragile identity, a consciousness that has been emotionally outsourced, trapped entirely within the suffocating matrix of external validations and volatile, unpredictable approvals. Carl Jung, the architect and supreme cartographer of the soul, meticulously mapped a form of bondage far more insidious and soul-destroying than any physical constraint: psychological slavery. This enslavement is silent, subtle, and manifests every time a stray casual criticism, a slight sideways glance, or an honestly differing opinion possesses the disruptive power to completely shatter your internal emotional equilibrium. When this psychic breach occurs, you have performed the ultimate tragic self-betrayal. You have voluntarily handed over the sovereign control of your mind, the one thing truly yours, to an external, ephemeral agent. Jung taught us the fundamental truth of perception, a truth that must be internalized. It is not the external events themselves that disturb the human psyche, but the specific, interpretive judgments the ego constructs about those events. Here is the crucial, crystalline distinction that determines your freedom. Offense is not something that happens to you. It is a complex, brittle psychic architecture that you are actively, continuously constructing internally. Offense requires your absolute, terrified cooperation. It is analogous to an invisible, self-signed contract you formalize every single time you interpret external words or actions as a direct, personal, and existential assault on your core essence. The structural flaw, the defensive ego, entities who live in this state of perpetual offense develop what Jungian analysis identifies as a defensive ego. This is a brittle, externalized mental structure built primarily on the shifting sand of external perception. This structure perceives the world not as a space for learning, growth, or mutual engagement, but as a treacherous, ceaseless battlefield where its fragile honor, the precious self-image, must be constantly, exhaustively defended at all costs. This mentality profoundly warps the geometry of reality. Every piece of constructive criticism is instantly interpreted as an existential threat. Every honest disagreement escalates into a personal conflict of wills, and every external comment, however benign, transforms into a definitive, annihilating judgment of the self. The inevitable result is a perpetually exhausting existence where every social interaction, from a boardroom meeting to a family dinner, carries the full potential to become a full-scale emotional war zone. Our voyage dives deeply into this destructive psychological mechanism. We will first understand precisely why this reactive posture takes hold, what it reveals about the true, unintegrated state of your identity, and how the rigorous discipline of Jungian analysis offers a definitive, unshakable path toward self-mastery. This is an internal revolution that demands the sovereign mastery of the self, rather than the futile, never-ending task of attempting to police and control the chaotic, unpredictable behavior of billions of external entities. Contrary to the current consensus belief, emotional immunity is not coldness, nor is it apathy. It is sovereign freedom. It is the freedom not to reflexively react. It is the freedom not to depend on the capricious, volatile approval of the collective. It is the profound freedom to remain perfectly centered and stable, even when the external world attempts to violently destabilize your internal axis. When you internalize and understand the true constructed nature of offense, everything fundamentally shifts. Words lose their destructive power. attacks become irrelevant noise, and your inherent mental peace is no longer held hostage to the chaotic, external behavior of others. Jung understood a brutal, liberating truth. There is more profound freedom in a mind that achieves mastery over its own reactions than in a free citizen whose peace is routinely shattered by every passing opinion. What is at stake here is not your subjective sensitivity, it is your ultimate, non-negotiable inner sovereignty. The psychological roots of outsourcing. The current society often celebrates heightened sensitivity as if it were an absolute, unassailable virtue. Individuals who claim the mantle of highly sensitive are often perceived as more aware, more ethical, and more humane. But a deeper analysis, a Jungian descent, asks, is this extreme, reactive sensitivity in fact an elegant, yet destructive disguise for a deep-seated emotional fragility? Upon closer, objective observation, we notice a clear, repeating pattern. Individuals who are easily offended are not merely reacting to verifiable injustices or necessary criticisms. They are engaged in a constant, desperate effort to protect a fragile identity, an ego that has been built exclusively on external validations and fundamentally unrealistic expectations of how the world should treat them. Jung's insight, mirroring that of the Stoics, is essential. For the easily offended, the consciousness lives as a slave, not of physical chains, but of the unpredictable words and judgments of other people. This slavery is doubly suffocating because it is functionally invisible to the sufferer. What the world superficially labels as sensitivity is, in the deeper psychological sense, a cognitive trap, a self-engineered way of operating that has fully and completely outsourced emotional control. When you cede the power to someone else's words or actions, allowing them to determine your internal emotional state, you are broadcasting a critical vulnerability to the universe. My peace, my value, my stability depends entirely on your behavior and your opinion of me. This stance forces the individual into a constant state of debilitating alertness and extreme vulnerability. They begin to live in a perpetual psychological minefield where any word, any glance, any shift in tone is instantly interpreted as a deliberate, directed attack. The mind, programmed by this fear, enters a state of chronic, exhaustive defensiveness. It is constantly expecting the blow, and because of this expectation, it frantically finds wounds everywhere. This reactive, brittle behavior is not only emotionally exhausting, it is socially and professionally paralyzing. People who are perpetually offended lose the core ability to listen to differing views with intellectual neutrality, to genuinely grow from necessary criticism, or to evolve through the healthy, difficult confrontation of competing ideas. And the most alarming part, this exacerbated sensitivity has been tragically confused with genuine moral strength, as if the constant reflexive indignation were proof of high character. But the psychological reality is harsh. Constant, uncontrolled indignation is the purest sign of structural instability, not virtue. The universal truth is immutable. The world is imperfect. People will disagree with you. They will criticize you. They will ignore you, and they will do so often without apology or malice. Believing that your dignity depends on how others treat you guarantees yourself a life of perpetual, avoidable suffering. True freedom, true psychological adulthood, begins when you realize that offense is not something others provoke in you, but something you allow to happen within yourself. When you truly internalize this, everything changes. You abandon the impossible, draining task of trying to control what is fundamentally outside your control. And that is precisely the point where the most powerful teaching of Jung's depth psychology begins. We continue the descent into the core of psychological freedom. For Jung, the human mind is fundamentally liberated the moment it understands a visceral, non-theoretical truth, that there are two fundamental categories in life. This distinction, which we will term the conscious task, paralleling the Stoic dichotomy of control, is not merely an elegant philosophical idea. In practice, it functions as a weapon of mass psychic destruction against the structures of offense, debilitating anxiety, chronic resentment, and all forms of self-inflicted psychological suffering. The architecture of the conscious task, What lies under your absolute control, your judgments, the meaning you assign? Your thoughts, the internal narrative you generate. Your interpretations, the filter through which you process raw data. Your actions, your external behavior, your reactions, your emotional and psychological response. What lies outside your control, the external chaos, the words of others, what they choose to say, their opinions, what they choose to think about you, their attitudes, how they choose to behave, their feelings about you, their emotional state. Jung's wisdom provides the existential balm within this distinction. If something disturbs you, it is not the event itself, but the judgment you have made about it. This statement means that no external agent, absolutely no one, can inflict offense upon you without your active voluntary participation. The act of taking offense requires you to 1. Interpret the external data as an attack, 2. Accept that interpretation as objective truth, and 3. Internalize it as an assault on your core worth. Without this cooperation, the offense is inert. It is merely sound waves or ink on a page, the failure of outsourcing identity. When you forget this fundamental distinction, the boundary between the inner and outer worlds, you react to everything as if it were intensely personal. A rude comment is instantly elevated to a humiliation. A genuine disagreement transforms into a betrayal. A structural criticism becomes an attack on your entire value. All of this internal chaos occurs only because you have blurred the line between what is yours, your mind, your response, and what belongs to the others, their words, their thoughts. You begin treating other people's volatile, ephemeral opinions as if they were an extension of your own identity. This is the perfect psychological recipe for living in continuous emotional captivity. Jung insisted, if something resides definitively outside your control, you must treat it as psychologically irrelevant. This is not an instruction to be passive or indifferent. It is a command to be unperturbed. This is the true Jungian strength, to maintain your internal center even when the external environment attempts to violently destabilize you. You do not control what they say, but you maintain absolute control over how you listen. You do not control whether they will grant you respect, but you maintain sovereignty over whether you will allow yourself to be internally damaged. This principle is not comfortable to apply. It demands mental training, relentless vigilance over your own reflexive thoughts, and a conscious effort to challenge the defensive programming of the ego. But once internalized, it radically transforms your relationship with the external world. You stop the futile, exhausting cycle of trying to change people and start the liberating, productive work of changing your internal response to them. This is the act of reclaiming the sovereign self. The shadows whisper, why we still react. Yet, even after intellectually grasping this principle, even knowing that an external judgment is outside your control, you still feel the visceral, automatic impulse to react. Why? What deeper, darker mechanism is operating behind this need to frantically defend your image, your honor, or your reputation? This compulsion to react is fueled by the shadow, the unacknowledged, repressed aspects of the self. The shadow whispers anxieties about your true worth, and when someone criticizes you, the ego defensively reacts not to the external word, but to the shadow's confirmation that the criticism might be true. The need to defend your image is a desperate attempt to silence your own internal self-doubt. In the subsequent chunks, we will dissect the 3 specific irrational beliefs, the deep, unseen pillars that sustain this mental prison of and expose how they fuel the fire of the fragile ego, sabotaging your peace without your conscious awareness. We must drag these beliefs from the dark territory of the unconscious into the light of awareness to dismantle them. We now dive into the subterranean architecture of the mind, dissecting the reason why, even after intellectually understanding the boundary of the conscious task, many individuals remain emotionally shattered by criticism, disrespect, or judgment. The compulsive reaction is sustained by a set of deeply rooted irrational beliefs that operate in the background, shaping our perception of reality. These are invisible yet profoundly powerful ideas, that fuel offense like fuel feeds a fire. Carl Jung's work allows us to identify and dismantle these beliefs, which are projections of an insecure, externalized ego. Understanding each one is like removing a structural chain from the emotional prison you may not even realize you inhabit. The first chain, opinion determines my worth. This is perhaps the single most destructive illusion a mind can carry, the fundamental cause of the outsourced self. The belief states, what others think about me defines who I am. When you subscribe to this idea, you become an instant, emotional hostage to external perceptions. If someone offers praise, you feel temporarily validated and uplifted. If they offer criticism, you feel structurally diminished, attacked, and sometimes annihilated. Your ego, built on this unstable foundation, constantly chases approval because it fears the consequences of criticism. Jung reminds us of the core truth. If someone presents you with a negative opinion, you are under no obligation to accept it. Someone's opinion of you is, in reality, a far clearer reflection of that person's mind and internal biases than it is a reflection of your true essence. Worth is not a democratic process. Determined by applause or boos, worth is an internal, sovereign metric. Every time you take offense, it is because, at a deep, unconscious level, you still grant others the lethal power to define who you are. The second chain, I must correct every wrong perception. This belief generates a silent, relentless compulsion to explain yourself, to defend your honor, to clarify every possible misunderstanding, and to manage every external narrative about you. You transform into a slave to your own image, acting as a constant vigilante of how you are being seen by the collective. This state is psychologically exhausting and fundamentally futile. Jung was categorical in identifying the price of this compulsion. If someone holds a wrong perception about you and you frantically expend energy trying to correct it, you are giving that person power over your mental peace. You have granted not only your valuable time, but your entire emotional center to someone who may not even possess the intellectual capacity to understand your truth, and perhaps does not even deserve that massive expenditure of effort. This compulsive defense mechanism is often a sign that you fear your own shadow, the belief that the criticism might be true. By trying to silence the external critic, you are trying to silence your own internal doubt. The truth is that you do not owe the world a perfect, pristine image. Your peace is more valuable than your reputation. The third chain, people owe me unconditional respect. This idea, on the surface, seems fair and reasonable. Who doesn't deserve dignity? However, in the chaotic reality of the world, expecting everyone to treat you with respect is like expecting the wind to blow only in one direction. It will simply not happen. People will inevitably ignore you, disrespect you, ridicule you, or misinterpret you. When you react with shock or fury, you are telling the universe, I expected everything outside my control to conform to my internal expectations. This is the ultimate, unsustainable illusion. Jungian wisdom teaches that people act according to their level of consciousness and their character, not according to your refined expectations. You have zero control over another person's behavior, only over how you choose to receive and respond to it. These three beliefs, that external opinion defines worth, that you must correct every perception, and that you are owed unconditional respect, are the invisible pillars that structurally support the entire edifice of offense. Knock down these pillars, and the defensive building collapses. The necessity of practice muscle for transformation. Intellectually knowing these truths is insufficient. It is merely a map. To achieve freedom, this knowledge must be transformed into living practice, into emotional muscle. This is the individuation process in action. The gradual integration of unconscious material to become a more resilient, complete self. The automatic reaction to offense is a deeply ingrained neural pathway. To break this, we must engage in structured psychological training. This training gradually develops immunity to offense, building in its place a mind that is truly free from external coercion. This shift moves you from being a defensive ego to an integrated self. We transition this psychological knowledge into concrete action. Carl Jung, like the Stoics, did not believe that wisdom is obtained solely through reading or abstract contemplation. For him, true emotional mastery, the process of individuation, is built through rigorous, constant practice, much like a warrior trains daily before battle. In the face of offense, Jungian application invites us to develop what we call Stoic immunity, a mental state where external offenses not only lose their destructive impact but are deliberately transformed into opportunities for inner strengthening. The 5 practices for Stoic immunity. This training is designed to dismantle the reflexive programming of the defensive ego and build the integrated self. 1. Daily premeditation of offense, the conscious rehearsal. Every morning, you must perform a brutal yet necessary ritual. Remind yourself, today, with almost total certainty, someone will criticize me, disagree with me, ignore me, or provoke me, and none of this external chaos is under my sovereign control. Anticipating the offense neutralizes its surprise attack and minimizes its impact. You are not caught off guard, and more crucially, you are training your brain to react with neutrality and calm. Jung recommended deliberately visualizing an offensive situation that you fear, for example, being humiliated or disrespected. Imagine the scene, feel the initial spike of anger or shame, and then rehearse your desired Stoic Jungian response: silence, clarity, and disidentification. Repeat this until that calm response feels functionally natural. This is the art of emotionally preparing for the worst, and by doing so, you render yourself untouchable. 2. The why do I care? Test the value audit. When the reactive impulse to take offense arises, stop and engage in a quick, ruthless internal audit. Why does this person's opinion genuinely matter to my being? Do they possess real authority over my life? Do I fundamentally respect their judgment? Does this criticism change anything objectively verifiable in my reality? In the vast majority of cases, the answer will be a resounding no. You are allowing yourself to be functionally offended by the words of someone whose judgment you do not even respect. This exercise reveals the absurdity of our reactive behavior, and this clarity alone profoundly weakens the impact of the offense. 3. The so what? Challenge symbolic ego death. This is the most challenging and profoundly liberating practice. When someone offends, criticizes, or devalues you, do not rush to defend. Simply engage the mental counter-query, so what? Or better yet, the courageous query, what if they are right? This requires ultimate philosophical courage to consider for a moment that your image, your reputation, your ideas may not be as untouchable as your ego demands. By confronting this fear head-on, you realize something liberating. Nothing actually changes at your core. Your real value does not diminish. The world does not end. This practice destroys the symbolic power of criticism, transforming it from a threat into a neutral mirror. 4. The Stoic reframe of offense, virtue practice. According to this wisdom, every offense is a disguised opportunity, a chance to deliberately practice an internal virtue. Criticism grants you the chance to exercise humility. Disrespect grants you the chance to exercise patience. Contempt grants you the chance to exercise self-control. Reacting with unperturbed indifference is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of supreme self-control. You are not ignoring the offense because you are passive, but because you have strategically decided to use it as training. The offender thinks they are hurting you, but in reality, they are strengthening your inner fortress. 5. Development of the internal locus of approval, inner fortress. Instead of seeking external validation, the dopamine hit of applause, you begin to measure your life exclusively based on your own defined values. Write down your core principles. Establish internal criteria for what constitutes a good day or a worthy action. At the end of each day, evaluate yourself based only on those internal metrics, not based on what others have said about you. Gradually, your mind ceases the frantic cirque. H for approval. You become your own sovereign judge. This is the core act of building the inner fortress, a self-sufficient psychological structure that criticism simply cannot penetrate. the hidden root, fragile identity in the defensive ego. Even with this training, a deep, dark dimension remains, the most hidden root of the reactive mind. Behind most offensive reactions is always a common structural flaw, a fragile identity, an ego constructed with borrowed pieces, validated entirely by external approval, frightened by rejection, and dependent on the fluctuating respect of others to feel functionally real. Jung understood this mechanism with brutal clarity. He observed that people who are frequently offended live with such an unstable sense of identity that any criticism or disrespect is instantly interpreted as an existential threat. They cannot distinguish between an attacked idea and a crushed personal value. Everything becomes personal. Everything becomes a war. This is the nature of the defensive ego, an ego that seeks not truth, but validation. It does not wish to learn, but only to be confirmed. It does not listen to understand, but to protect itself. And when the world inevitably fails to offer this constant validation, this ego reacts with predictable resentment and fury. The constant defense comes at a massive cost. Living defensively is living in a state of chronic mental warfare. It is an endless, draining effort to manage others' opinions, control external perception, and shield oneself from any sign of devaluation. The liberating truth: this is not a flaw in the system, this is the system. When you internalize this, you realize your mission is not to be understood or respected by everyone. Your mission is different, to become internally unshakable to the point of no longer needing external protection. This is what Jung defines as individuation, dev. Eloping an inner fortress where offense simply does not reach you. We now confront the most radical, existentially challenging, and profoundly liberating practice in this entire journey toward individuation: the deliberate, disciplined premeditation of offense. This advanced psychological technique targets the defensive ego at its very root, transforming expected external suffering into a precise, systematic exercise for internal power and strengthening. The ritual of anticipation, mentally dismantling the attack. Imagine vividly placing yourself in the future moment where you are criticized, publicly disrespected, or unfairly judged. The unprepared mind operates on expectation, praying that this negative event won't happen, or frantically rehearsing verbal counter-defenses to protect its image. The Jungian strategist does the profound opposite. They anticipate the offense, they rehearse it, they transform the expected suffering into a structured, internal ritual of strengthening, a conscious process of desensitization. Jung's application of this technique involves mentally placing yourself before your greatest social fears: the deepest fear of being insulted, the shame of being ignored, the fury of being misrepresented. You must visualize every excruciating detail of the scene. You allow the raw, powerful emotion to fully surface: the spike of anger, the cold wash of shame, the debilitating frustration, and then you deliberately rehearse the integrated sovereign response: absolute silence, unyielding firmness in action, and profound disidentification. The goal is not to stop the feeling, the goal is to stop the reaction. When the actual external offense inevitably occurs, and it will occur, you have already mentally faced, absorbed, and processed its full expected impact. At that moment, the external attack will find no fertile ground to germinate within your consciousness. You have preemptively declared your psychic boundaries. You are already mentally, structurally, and emotionally larger than the expected pain. This preparation is radical because it demands brutal, unflinching honesty with your own frailties. It requires the courage to look the profound fear of not being respected directly in the eye and accepting its presence. Most importantly, it requires the conscious willingness to allow the fragile ego to symbolically die, to utterly release the need for external approval and shatter the illusion of control over others' perceptions. The transformation from offendable to unshakable, and the price of peace. When you achieve this level of rigorous mental preparation, something irreversible occurs. You become unoffendable. Being unoffendable does not equate to being apathetic, emotionally cold, or passively withdrawing. It signifies that your inherent dignity, your self-defined sense of worth, and your core inner peace are permanently removed from the marketplace. They are no longer for sale. An untouchable person is structurally dangerous because they cannot be manipulated by praise, nor can they be controlled by external criticism. They are simply free. Their subsequent actions do not stem from the fear of displeasing or the desperate desire to please. They arise solely from internal clarity and strategic purpose. They move through the world with an almost unbelievable serenity because they have discovered the fundamental liberating truth. The true battlefield is not the external environment, but the internal theater of the mind. And the most powerful victory you can ever achieve is not over others, it is the mastery over oneself. When you stop being offended, you do far more than merely conserve finite mental energy. You stop living reactively. You cease the futile, exhausting effort of trying to manipulate the external behavior of billions of people to preserve your internal stability. You begin to live from the inside out. You become a psychological adult, sovereign over the only thing that truly belongs to you, your consciousness. The dark dimension, the fragile identity, and the defense mechanism. Behind most offensive reactions, there is always a common structural flaw, a fragile identity, an ego constructed with borrowed pieces, validated entirely by external approval, paralyzed by the fear of rejection, and utterly dependent on the fluctuating respect of others to feel functionally real. Jung understood this mechanism with brutal clarity. He observed that people who are frequently offended live with such an unstable, externalized sense of identity that any criticism or disrespect is instantly interpreted as an existential threat. They lose the ability to distinguish between an attacked idea and a crushed personal value. Everything becomes personal. Everything escalates into war. This is the nature of the defensive ego, an ego that seeks not truth but relentless validation. It does not wish to learn, but only to be confirmed. It does not listen to understand, but only to protect itself. And when the world inevitably fails to offer this constant, perfect validation, which it will, this ego reacts with predictable resentment, rage, and fury. The constant defense comes at an insanely high price. Living defensively is living in a state of chronic internal warfare. It is an endless, draining effort to manage others' opinions, control external perception, and shield oneself from any sign of devaluation. The liberating truth: this chaos is not a flaw in the universal system. This is the system. When you internalize this, you realize your mission is not to be universally understood or respected. Your mission is different: to become internally unshakable to the point of no longer eating external protection. This is the essence of individuation, developing an inner fortress where offense simply does not reach you, the 7 stages of transformation, and the internal locus of approval. To cement this mastery, the advanced practitioner must actively integrate the following processes: moving away from the defensive externalized ego toward the self. Dismantle the tyranny of opinion. Use the why do I care test until the belief that other people's opinions determine my worth is neurologically severed. External judgment must be relegated to psychological irrelevance. Embrace symbolic ego death. Regularly engage in the so what challenge, accepting the possibility that external criticism might be accurate, thereby destroying its symbolic power to wound you. Harness the virtue reframe. View every offense not as an attack, but as a deliberate training opportunity to practice patience, humility, and self-control. Activate the internal locus. Build the internal locus of approval by defining your own non-negotiable values and judging your actions only against those criteria. Making your mind independent of the dopamine hit of applause. Enforce the conscious task. Maintain relentless vigilance over the dichotomy of control, ensuring you only expend energy on your judgments and reactions, not on controlling the external world's words and actions. Shatter the compulsion to correct. Stop the futile act of explaining yourself. Your peace is more valuable than correcting the misperceptions of those who do not deserve your emotional labor. Sustain the premeditation ritual. Make the premeditation of offense a daily ritual, keeping your emotional responses pre-rehearsed and stable, ensuring you are never caught unprepared by the inevitable chaos of human interaction. This is not a theoretical exercise. These are concrete instruments of transformation, mental rehearsals that shape a new type of human being, one who is not a hostage to words, who does not need others' approval, and who reacts to external attack with absolute sovereign clarity. We approach the summit of this psychological architecture, where the principles of the conscious task are fully integrated into a state of unshakable sovereignty. This is the final stage of individuation, the realization of true internal freedom as defined by Carl Jung, the internal fortress versus the system. The constant defense of the defensive ego comes at a massive, unsustainable cost. Living defensively is living in a state of chronic self-imposed warfare. It demands insane mental energy to constantly manage others' opinions, control external perception, and shield oneself from any potential sign of devaluation. The liberating truth, this continuous chaos, is not a flaw in the universal system. This is the immutable system of human interaction. People will relentlessly criticize, misinterpret, and disrespect you. When you internalize this, you realize that your life's mission is not the futile, exhausting task of being universally understood or respected. Your mission is radically different, to become internally unshakable to the point of no longer needing any external protection. This is the Jungian definition of true freedom. It is not residing in an environment where no one offends you. That is an impossibility and an illusion. It is developing an inner fortress so structurally sound that external offense simply does not reach you. The psychological adult, sovereign consciousness. The journey to psychological adulthood culminates in the acceptance of this truth. You stop trying to manipulate the external behavior of others, their words, their actions, to preserve your own internal stability. You begin to live from the inside out. When you stop being offended, you achieve via triple victory, energy conservation. You save the immense mental energy previously wasted on reactive defense. Strategic living, you stop living reactively, allowing you to act from strategic clarity and purpose. Sovereign consciousness, you become sovereign over the only thing that truly belongs to you, your own mind. Carl Jung, the former slave who achieved ultimate inner freedom, understood a brutal core truth. Those who require the external world to treat them well to be at peace will never be at peace. But those who master their internal response no longer need to protect themselves from the world, because they have become the shield themselves. The final test, internal locus, and the end of victimhood. The internal locus of approval must become your sole judge. You must dismantle the last vestiges of the victim mentality, which is predicated on the belief that bad things should not happen to me. The ultimate freedom is realizing that you cannot be victimized by external words, only by your own decision to accept those words as a definition of your worth. This realization is the final radical departure from the defensive ego. Your consciousness is no longer a porous boundary where external judgments can enter freely. It is a secured border. The legacy of freedom. The power of this transformation is immense. People who achieve this level of self-mastery are often mistaken for being cold or aloof. In reality, they are simply free. Their actions are not motivated by the fear of displeasing or the desperate desire to please. They arise from an internal clarity and completeness. This is the ultimate practical result of integrating the conscious task into your being. You cease to be a hostage to words, you discard the need for others' approval, and you react to attack with absolute sovereign calm. The continuation of the path, the journey does not end with intellectual understanding. It continues through the constant daily practice of the premeditation of offense and the rigorous application of the dichotomy of control. Every challenge you face is no longer a punishment, but a training exercise designed to reinforce your inner fortress. We reach the final crucial destination of this psychological voyage. We must fully integrate the knowledge that the true origin of suffering in the face of offense is not the external world, but a profound internal fragility. This integration completes the process of self-sovereignty, the true origin of suffering, the defensive ego's price. Behind most offensive reactions, no matter how sophisticated they appear, is always a common structural flaw, a fragile identity. This is an ego constructed with borrowed pieces, validated entirely by external applause, paralyzed by the fear of rejection, and utterly dependent on the fluctuating respect of others to feel functionally real. Carl Jung understood this mechanism with brutal clarity. He observed that people who are frequently offended live with such an unstable, externalized sense of identity that any criticism or disrespect is instantly interpreted as an existential threat. They lose the ability to distinguish between an attacked idea and a crushed personal value. Everything becomes personal. Everything escalates into war. This is the nature of the defensive ego, an ego that seeks not objective truth, but frantic validation. It does not wish to learn, but only to be confirmed. It does not listen to understand, but only to protect itself. And when the world inevitably fails to offer this constant, perfect validation, which it will, this ego reacts with predictable resentment, rage, and fury. The constant defense comes at an insanely high price. Living defensively is living in a state of chronic internal warfare. It is an endless draining effort to manage others' opinions, control external perception, and shield oneself from any sign of devaluation. The final synthesis, the unshakable shield, the liberating truth is that this external chaos is not a flaw in the universal system. This is the universal system. When you internalize this, you realize your mission is not the futile task of being universally understood or respected. Your mission is radically different, to become internally unshakable to the point of no longer needing external protection. This is the Jungian definition of individuation, developing an inner fortress where offense simply does not reach you. The true origin of suffering is not the external event, but your own decision to accept that external event as a definition of your worth. The legacy of freedom. The power of this transformation is immense. People who achieve this level of self-mastery are often mistaken for being cold or aloof. In reality, they are simply free. Their actions are not motivated by the fear of displeasing or the desperate desire to please. They arise from an internal clarity and completeness. This is the ultimate practical result of integrating the conscious task into your being. You cease to be a hostage to words, you discard the need for others' approval, and you react to attack with absolute sovereign calm. Carl Jung, who even when physically chained achieved ultimate inner freedom, understood the core truth. Those who require the external world to treat them well to be at peace will never be at peace. But those who master their internal response no longer need to protect themselves from the world because they have become the shield themselves. The journey does not end with intellectual understanding. It continues through the constant, daily practice of the premeditation of offense and the rigorous application of the dichotomy of control. Every challenge you face is no longer a punishment, but a training exercise designed to reinforce your inner fortress.